There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a room when someone realizes they have badly, irreversibly miscalculated. I have witnessed that silence exactly once in my life in a conference room on a Wednesday morning, and I will carry the memory of it for as long as I live. Not because it gave me pleasure, because it gave me clarity. And clarity at 67 years old is the only luxury I still actively pursue. My name is Vincent Malone. I am 67 years old. I drive a 2004 Ford F-150 that my daughter has been lobbying me to replace since roughly the second Obama administration. The truck is dark green, or it was dark green once. Now it is more of a suggestion of green, the way an old photograph suggests the color of something without quite committing to it. The passenger seat has a crack along the headrest that I have been meaning to patch for 6 years and have not patched. The rear bumper has a dent from a parking lot in Knoxville in 2019 that I remember clearly because I was thinking about a contract at the time and was not paying attention. I did not fix that either. I live in the same house I bought in 1991 on Ridgeline Road in Asheville, North Carolina. 3 bedrooms, a covered porch I added in 2003, a garden in the back that my wife started before she passed, and that I have maintained ever since in the particular stubborn way of a man who is not ready to let certain things go. My neighbor Hector, retired electrician, good man, absolutely terrible at estimating distances when he backs his RV out of the driveway, told me once that I was the most deliberately unremarkable person he had ever met. I told him I took that as a compliment. He wasn't sure if I was joking. I wasn't. Here is what Hector does not know, what the folks at my church do not know, what the young woman at the hardware store who calls me Mr. Malone and asks after my tomatoes every spring does not know. I own Ridgeline Capital Partners, commercial real estate, private equity, a stake in 2 regional hospital networks, and a portfolio of industrial properties spread across the southeastern United States and parts of the mid-Atlantic. The holdings are structured through a series of LLCs and holding entities carefully assembled over 35 years, so that my name surfaces, if it surfaces at all, as a footnote on a subsidiary document that nobody outside a very specific kind of attorney would bother to read. No profile in any business publication, no keynote speeches, no charitable foundations with my name on the letterhead, though I give considerably and have for decades, always quietly, always through intermediaries. Ridgeline Capital Partners has a current valuation of approximately $2.4 billion. The truck has a crack in the headrest and a dent in the bumper, and I would not change a single thing about it. Now let me tell you about my daughter. Haley Malone is 32 years old, and she is, without qualification or exaggeration, the best decision I ever made. Sharp in the way her mother was sharp, which is to say sharp without any interest in making you feel it. She has this way of listening to a person, really listening, where she goes very still, and you can see her actually processing what you're saying, rather than composing her response. When she was 9 years old, she came to me with a type-printed 3-page proposal for why she should be allowed to adopt a second dog. I read it. It was genuinely persuasive. I said no anyway, because I am only human. She revised it and submitted a second version 2 weeks later. We have had 2 dogs ever since. I did not fully anticipate who she was going to marry. 2 years ago, Haley brought home a man named Sutton Graves. I want to be precise here and give credit where it exists. Sutton Graves is not a stupid man. That is important to understand. Stupid men are easy to manage. What Sutton was something more specific and in some ways more difficult. He was a man of moderate accomplishment who had mistaken the volume of his confidence for the depth of his ability. He was 36, fit, well-dressed in that aggressive way of men who understand clothing as a form of argument. Within 20 minutes of meeting me, he had referenced his graduate degree from Vanderbilt, a consulting engagement he'd done in Dubai, and his opinion of the best steakhouse in Nashville, which was where he and Haley had met at a friend's birthday party. I nodded. I asked him about the consulting work. He explained it for 11 minutes without actually describing what the work involved. 14 months after he and Haley married, Sutton was brought on as chief operating officer of a company called Ashford Industrial Holdings, a regional industrial property management firm. Solid operation. 68 employees. Long-term contracts with distribution companies across the Carolinas and Tennessee. Good fundamentals. Real value. He got the job through what appeared to be a standard executive search. Recruiter, multiple rounds of interviews. A board evaluation process that produced a unanimous recommendation. What Sutton did not know, and what I want you to understand fully before the rest of this story unfolds, is that Ashford Industrial Holdings is a portfolio company of Ridgeline Capital Partners. Has been for 9 years. I approved the acquisition personally. I know the balance sheets, the way I know the cracks in my own kitchen ceiling, and I sat on the other side of a very careful one-way arrangement with the search firm, and reviewed every round of Sutton's interview process from the first phone screen to the final presentation. He performed well. I want to be honest about that. He performed well enough that I would have approved him even without the personal connection. But I also sat with that knowledge and understood something clearly. Sutton Graves had just become COO of a company I owned, and he had absolutely no idea. And I intended to keep it that way for as long as it was useful to keep it that way. He texted me the evening of his offer letter. Big news. Landed a major COO role. Haley's over the moon. Hard work paying off. I typed back, well earned, son. Proud of you. Then I put my phone in my shirt pocket and went out to check on the tomatoes. I want to be honest with you about something. I am not a man who decides how he feels about a person quickly. I have built enough businesses and managed enough people over 4 decades to understand that early impressions are just data, not conclusions. People reveal themselves over time. I know this. I have been surprised before in both directions. Sutton did not surprise me. What he did instead was confirm, steadily and without deviation, the impression he had made in the first 20 minutes. It was not cruelty exactly. It was dismissal. The particular dismissal of a man who looks at someone and performs a rapid and unflattering calculation and then, having made his determination, simply stops looking. The first time I noticed it clearly was at a dinner Haley hosted, maybe 6 months into their marriage. One of Sutton's colleagues from work was there, a younger guy, ambitious, the kind who collects proximity to senior people the way others collect frequent flyer miles. The topic of family came up, and someone asked me what I'd done before retirement. Before I could answer, Sutton said pleasantly, easily, he's a retired contractor. Built things. Vincent, you were in construction, right? I had been in commercial real estate development and capital management for 35 years. But I said something like that, and smiled, and the conversation moved on. I filed it away. The moment that changed things happened on a Tuesday morning about 5 months ago. I had a reason to be near Ashford's office complex, a meeting with one of my holding company representatives at a space 2 floors below. I was, as I always am in any professional context, completely unremarkable. An older man in clean, modest clothes, the kind of person a busy office building accepts without registering. As I crossed the second floor corridor toward the elevator, I heard Sutton's voice coming from a glass-walled conference room, door slightly ajar. He was talking to 2 other men, mid-level manager types, end of the workday energy, coats off, sleeves rolled. I stopped. Haley worries about him, Sutton was saying, and I could hear the ease in his voice, the comfort of a man on his own turf talking to people he considers an audience. Her dad's fine, he's just, he was in construction back in the day, I think he did okay. But he's in that phase, Fixed income, the house on the same street he's lived on for 30 years, drives that old truck everywhere. She feels like she should be checking on him. One of the other men said something I couldn't quite catch. Sutton laughed. She's loyal, it's a good quality. I just figure our generation is going to have to carry a lot of people. You know what I mean? Part of the deal. I stood in that corridor for 2 more seconds. Then I straightened my jacket and walked to the elevator and went to my meeting. Carry a lot of people. I am a patient man. My father was a patient man. He used to say that the only real advantage a calm person has over an anxious one is that the calm person can wait, and waiting, done correctly, is a form of power most people never learn to use. I put those words in a drawer in my mind and I closed the drawer and I waited. The invitation came on a Sunday afternoon. Haley called. Warm, a little excited in the way she gets when she's trying something she hopes will go well. Sutton's parents were hosting a gathering at their home in Biltmore Park, the upscale development on the south side of Asheville. His father, a man named Charles Graves, was a semi-retired financial advisor who had done well for himself in the 90s and spent the subsequent decades making sure people understood this. His mother, a woman named Vivienne, was the kind of woman who treats social events as competitive events and has simply never told anyone else the score. Dad, you'll love them, Haley said. They're very warm. I'm sure they are, I said. I already knew several things about Charles and Vivienne Graves that complicated that sentence considerably, but I kept them to myself. 2 days before the gathering, Sutton called me directly. He was friendly in that particular way people are friendly when they are positioning themselves to say something slightly uncomfortable and have already decided to say it. Hey, Vincent, just wanted to give you a heads up about Saturday. My parents' place is, they do things a certain way. Pretty traditional. So if you wanted to maybe, I don't know, dress up a little. Nothing formal, just, something a step up from casual. There was a pause. I appreciate you thinking of me, Sutton, I said pleasantly. Of course, he said, relieved the way a man is relieved when he thinks he's successfully managed something. Just want everyone to feel comfortable. You know how it is. I do, I said. I'll see you Saturday. I hung up. I stood in the hallway for a moment looking at nothing in particular. Then I walked to my closet, moved past the charcoal suit in the back, the navy one beside it, the ones I last wore when Ridgeline closed its acquisition of the Carolinas hospital network 4 years ago. Moved past all of it, and I took out clean slacks, a plain button-down in light gray, my everyday belt, unremarkable shoes, polished but without any ambitions. I laid them out on the chair by the window. Then I walked out to the driveway and put my hand on the roof of the F-150, the way you might put your hand on the shoulder of someone who has been with you a long time and whose judgment you trust. "We've got a dinner," I said quietly, to no one in particular, because here is what Sutton Graves did not understand. What Charles and Vivienne Graves, sitting in their home in Biltmore Park, arranging things the way people arrange things when they want guests to feel a certain way, did not understand. I was not dressing down because I had nothing better. I was dressing down because I wanted to see who they were when they were absolutely certain nothing was at stake. And I had a feeling, the kind of feeling that comes from 40 years of watching people perform themselves for an audience, that they were about to show me everything I needed to see. Saturday arrived the way consequential days tend to arrive. Quietly, without any acknowledgement of itself. I woke before 6, made coffee the way I have made it every morning for decades, black, no sugar, and sat at the kitchen table looking out at the garden in the early light. The tomatoes were doing well. The beds my wife planted along the back fence were in full color, the way she would have wanted them. I dressed slowly. I was calm. I have found over the course of a long life that calm is not the absence of awareness. It is awareness with nowhere urgent to be. I drove to Biltmore Park in the F-150. The engine did what it always does, which is make slightly more noise than strictly necessary and run perfectly regardless. The Graves house was at the end of a cul-de-sac on a street where the landscaping was the kind that communicates not beauty but control. Shaped hedges, edged lawns, flowers in arrangements that looked less planted than deployed. The house itself was large in the deliberate way of houses that are built to be looked at. All the right materials in all the right quantities, communicating the same message every surface communicated. We belong here, and belonging here is something worth communicating. A young man near the driveway, some combination of staff and host's son, looked at the F-150 when I pulled in and then looked at me and made an expression I recognized and did not react to. "Can I park it for you?" he asked. "She pulls left on turns," I told him. "Don't let that concern you." He took the keys. Charles Graves opened the door before I reached it. He was a tall man, mid-70s, silver at the temples, the posture of someone who played golf seriously for 40 years, and built an identity around being the kind of person who plays golf seriously. He smiled at me with the smile of a host who has already categorized his guests and is comfortable with where I've landed. "Vincent," he said warmly. "Glad you made it. Come on in." His handshake was practiced, the kind of handshake that communicates authority without threatening anyone. Vivienne Graves came from across the entryway, elegant in the particular way that takes years to assemble and considerable money to maintain. She took both my hands in hers, which is the physical gesture of warmth that substitutes for the feeling itself. "Vincent," she said, "we have heard so much about you. You are just as Haley described. So genuine, genuine." There it was. First word. The word people reach for when they want to say something that sounds like a compliment but is actually a kind of appraisal. The word that means you are exactly what you look like, and what you look like is simple. "You have a beautiful home," I said. She beamed. People who have built their identity around their possessions never tire of this. Haley came across the room and hugged me the way she has hugged me since she was small, fully, without self-consciousness. I held on to it a moment longer than usual. "You look good, Dad," she said quietly. "So do you, sweetheart." Sutton appeared. He looked at my outfit. Something moved across face. Half a second, a small internal wince, and then it was gone, replaced by the performance of hospitality. "Vincent, glad you're here," he said, hand on my shoulder. "Charles just opened a really exceptional bottle. Come on." Exceptional. Everything that evening was exceptional. The wine, the appetizers, the view from the back patio. Charles told me 3 times that the house had appreciated considerably since they bought it in 2003, each time as though this were new information. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with the particular formality that is designed less for comfort than for contrast. I sat. I unfolded my napkin. I asked polite questions about things I already knew the answers to. I complimented things I had no strong feelings about. I listened to Charles talk about Sutton's instincts at Ashford Industrial, with the pride of a man taking credit by proximity. "He's completely turned that operation around," Charles said, swirling his glass. "The board talks about him differently now. I always said, if you give that boy the right runway, he'll fly." I nodded. "You must be very proud," I said. Vivienne turned to Haley with a smile that had a very specific architecture. "And you must feel so settled having a husband who's doing so well. It's such a relief, isn't it, to not have to worry about those things." The table went quiet for approximately 2 seconds. Haley smiled with every muscle in her face except her eyes. I saw her hands in her lap. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and said nothing, because the document hadn't come out yet, and I knew, with the patience of a man who has been waiting a long time for a specific thing, that when it did, this evening was going to mean something different than anyone at this table currently understood. The document arrived with coffee and dessert. Charles reached to the credenza behind him and produced a manila folder with the careful deliberateness of a man who has been waiting all evening to do this specific thing. He set it on the table. He smoothed the top once. He slid it across to me. "Vincent," he said, his voice dropping into a register I recognized as rehearsed, "there's a matter we'd like to discuss as a family." I looked at the folder. I did not touch it. Sutton had straightened in his chair, performing casualness. Vivian's hands were folded. Haley was looking at me with an expression I knew from her childhood, uncertain, reading me carefully, not yet sure what she was reading. "Sutton has an opportunity," Charles continued. "A real opportunity. His own venture, built from scratch. The kind of thing that only comes once. We have full confidence in him, naturally. What we need is startup capital." He paused. "What we're proposing is a straightforward arrangement. A loan secured against Haley's anticipated inheritance. Properly documented, fully legal. We just need your blessing, Vincent, as Haley's father, to move forward." He leaned back, satisfied in the way of a man who has said the thing he came to say. I looked at Charles. I looked at Vivian. I looked at Sutton, who was looking at a point just to the left of my face, which is what people do when they want to appear confident and are not. I thought, "You have absolutely no idea who you just handed this folder to." I picked it up. I opened it. I read every page slowly, the way I have read contracts for 40 years, which is to say completely, without skipping anything, tracking every subordinate clause and every figure and every piece of language that had been chosen carefully to obscure what it was actually proposing. It was proposing a considerable sum. It was secured against Haley's inheritance, which these people clearly believed existed in some accessible, transferable form. It was structured to benefit Sutton's new venture at my daughter's direct financial exposure. I closed the folder. I set it gently on the table. I took a slow sip of water. "I appreciate the thought that went into this," I said pleasantly. "I'll review it carefully." Charles exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath since the salad course. Sutton's shoulders dropped a fraction. Vivian reached for her wine with the energy of a woman who considers the hard part finished. I made pleasant conversation for 20 more minutes. I thanked Vivian for a lovely evening. I shook Charles's hand full grip and held his eye 1 second longer than the situation required. He did not know what that second meant. I walked out to the driveway. The young man brought the F-150 around. I tipped him more than he expected and watched the surprise move across his face. I got in. The engine cleared its throat. The air conditioning came on, considered its options, and decided to cooperate. I pulled out of that cul-de-sac and drove home through the dark streets of Asheville, and I was so calm it probably would have troubled anyone who understood what I was about to do. I said nothing for 11 days. I went to church. I had coffee with Hector on Thursday morning. I tended the back beds and replaced the stakes on 2 of the tomato plants. On day 5, Sutton texted, "Hey Vincent, just checking in. Hope you had a chance to review the proposal. Exciting opportunity, right?" I waited 4 hours and typed back, "Still working through it, son. Want to make sure I understand everything." He sent a thumbs up. I set my phone down. Then I made a phone call. Not to Sutton, not to Charles. To the 2 senior members of Ashford Industrial's board of directors, men who had known me through Ridgeline for years, men who understood that when I called directly, it was not a social call. "I need a full compliance audit," I said. "Scope it broadly. Prioritize executive conduct and use of company resources. Start immediately." Then I went back to the garden. What the audit found took 9 days to fully document. When the report came to me, I read it at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning with my coffee, in the same chair I sit in every morning, looking out at the same garden, and I sat with it for a long time before I moved. Sutton Graves had been developing the framework for his independent venture for 6 months. On company time, on company devices, using Ashford Industrial's proprietary client data, vendor relationships, and internal market analysis to build a business plan that would, if executed, compete directly with Ridgeline Capital Partners' portfolio in the Carolinas industrial sector. He had done this carefully and quietly and with complete confidence that no one above him in the structure had any idea what he was doing or any ability to act on it if they did. He had forgotten something I consider basic. You cannot build something in secret inside a house you do not own. Every meeting, every document, every contact made on company time, all of it in direct violation of the fiduciary duty and non-compete provisions he had signed in his employment contract. All of it documented, all of it sitting in a folder on my kitchen table on a Sunday morning. On Wednesday, I went to my closet and took out the charcoal suit, pressed the night before navy tie, not because I needed the formality, but because the situation had one. I drove the F-150 to Ashford Industrial's main office and parked in the space near the entrance marked Ridgeline Capital Partners, reserved. The placard had been there for 9 years. Sutton had walked past it twice a week for 18 months and had never once asked whose name belonged to it. I walked into the conference room, board members to my left, legal counsel to my right, the audit report in a folder in front of me. I sat at the head of the table and I waited. The door opened 7 minutes later. Sutton came in carrying his usual confidence the way he carried everything, easily, fitted precisely to his sense of himself. He registered the board members, the attorneys, the documents on the table, and then his eyes found me, sitting at the head of that table in a suit he had never seen, and I watched what happened to his face. It was not a dramatic thing. It was actually very quiet. It was simply the visible experience of a man understanding, floor by floor, with no way to stop the process, what the last 18 months had actually been. The F-150 in the parking lot, the reserved placard, his employment contract, the dinner in Biltmore Park, the folder on the table, all of it arriving at once. The silence lasted 8 seconds. I let every one of them exist. Then I said, "Sit down, Sutton." He sat. "I want to be clear about something before I say anything else," I said. "I am not angry. I want you to really hear that. Anger is for men who didn't see this coming. I have been watching this coming since the evening you explained consulting logistics to me for 11 minutes without describing what you actually do." I opened the folder. Ashford Industrial Holdings is owned by Ridgeline Capital Partners. Ridgeline Capital Partners is mine, has been for 19 years. The company where you have spent 18 months building your reputation, the title, the salary, the credibility you've been introducing yourself with at every networking event and dinner party, it exists because I built it. I brought you in because I saw enough to give you the opportunity. And for 6 months, you used the resources of that opportunity to construct something designed to compete against the portfolio that made you possible. I closed the folder. The provisions in your employment contract cover every finding in this audit. Our legal team is prepared to pursue the full scope of remedies available if that becomes necessary. The confidence was gone, not gradually. All at once, the way a room goes dark when a switch is thrown. He looked in that moment, and for the first time since I had known him, like a man who had run out of the thing he relied on most and didn't yet know what to do without it. "However," I said, "I am not interested in destroying you. I am interested in honesty, which is something we have not had between us, and which I would like to have now." I watched him. "You resigned today. The terms are professional, the record is clean, and this stays in this room. Or we proceed and everything in that folder becomes part of a public record." He looked at the board members. Neutral. The attorneys. Neutral, back at me. And then something happened that I had not prepared for. His jaw moved. Not words. Something underneath words. I have sat across from a great many people in the course of a long business life, and I know the difference between a person performing remorse and a person actually experiencing it. What I saw on Sutton Graves's face at that moment was the real thing. Quiet, private, the particular shame of a man who has finally seen himself clearly and does not recognize the person he found. "I'll resign," he said. The words were simple, and they cost him something real. "All right," I said. I stood. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up the folder. At the door, I stopped. "The proposal your father presented at dinner," I said. "The inheritance as collateral. I sat on that for 11 days. This morning, my attorney transferred Haley's inheritance directly into her name, into an account that requires her signature alone. Whatever your father was planning to secure against that inheritance, there is nothing there to secure against anymore. Please tell your parents the coffee was excellent." I drove home in the F-150. The engine did what it always does. The air conditioning came on and stayed on this time, which I chose to take as a sign of something. I turned onto Ridgeline Road and pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment. Just sat, the way you sit when something long is finished. 35 years of being the man in the room that nobody looked at twice. Knowing the entire time exactly who I was. I patted the dashboard once. Then I went inside and called my daughter. She came over 40 minutes later. I had 2 cups of tea already on the table when she walked in. She sat down across from me and she looked at my face the way she has looked at my face since she was small, the way of a person reading something they know well. I told her everything, the company, the structure, how Ashford had come to be in the portfolio, how I had reviewed Sutton's hiring process, the corridor on the 2nd floor and what I had heard, the audit, the boardroom, the inheritance transfer, all of it laid out without drama in the same voice I use for everything. When I finished, Haley was quiet for a long time. Outside, the evening had come down over the garden, and the light was going soft, and the tomatoes were silhouettes against the back fence. She looked up at me. "Dad," she said, "why didn't you ever tell me any of it?" I looked at my cup. I looked out at the garden. I looked back at her mother's eyes in her face, at the woman who at 9 years old wrote 3 pages of careful argument for a second dog and then revised them. "Because I wanted your life to be yours," I said, "not a response to what I have. I never wanted you to look at me and see a balance sheet. I wanted you to see your father." She didn't say anything for a while. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and I let her, and we sat there in the quiet of that kitchen while the light finished going and the tea went cool. I thought briefly about Charles Graves and Biltmore Park, about the moment someone would find the words to tell him how the evening had resolved, about Vivienne setting down her glass, about Sutton trying to explain to his parents what had actually been sitting across the table from them in that dining room, in clean slacks and an unremarkable shirt the whole time. I thought about all of it for a moment. Then I let it go. Because the only thing in this world that has ever mattered to me was sitting right here, across this kitchen table, hand over mine, in the house I bought in 1991 on a quiet street, where the oaks are older than most of the decisions I've made, and all of them were worth it. Some men spend their lives making sure you know what they have, others spend their lives knowing it themselves. The difference, in the end, is everything.